Hello, today is Tuesday, September 21st, 2021. I'm Joe Schmidt from TC2, and this is Staying Connected. In the era of cloud-first architectures, using software as a service apps, moving more corporate data center applications to infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, what's considered the best practices for hardening and delivering resiliency to support this cloud-first architecture? On today's podcast, I'm joined by two guys who know a lot about this topic, so we're going to find out. I'm here with my colleague and good friend David Lee, who is TC2's technical director, and another colleague and a buddy of mine, and super smart guy Brent Knight, who is a senior consultant at TC2. We are going to look at how to efficiently harden and deliver resiliency in the enterprise WAN, the potential trip-ups for enterprise facilities and work-from-home scenarios, and what enterprise customers should do. Hey, David and Brent, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Joe. It's good to be here today.
Yes, Joe. It's good to be back on the podcast.
So, David, talk a bit about hardening and resiliency for the anywhere enterprise.
Sure, Joe. Let me give a quick overview first of the challenge enterprises are facing now. As more applications are being transitioned to or are already in the cloud, as well as what you mentioned, the work for home becoming the new normal for many businesses since COVID-19 is now becoming COVID-21, there's an urgent need for work from anywhere to support the modern enterprise organization.
Yeah, so we've definitely seen that with our clients who have moved applications from local sites or regional data centers into the cloud. So, Brent, what are some of the challenges enterprises are facing?
It really comes down to eliminating the single point of failure in the WAN network, whether it's at the enterprise's branch site, a carrier-neutral facility, or a cloud provider. With so much of the enterprise dependent on real-time access to their applications in the cloud, that connection is the critical lifeline that enterprises can't afford to see fail. To keep that connectivity, diversity is the key must-have and at the same time, a key challenge that enterprises must solve for. In addition, by attempting to deploy diversity, it's important that companies be aware of the cost that the carriers may attempt to push to the enterprise and the techniques to avoid these issues.
Okay, David, is this new normal for networking that we see here? I mean, what does diversity look like for an enterprise?
Joe, I'll define WAN or wide area network diversity in three areas that can be provided by the actual carrier, and a fourth area that is an enterprise responsibility for diversity. The three diversity areas that can be provided by the carriers is, number one, local access diversity, two, POP diversity or points of presence diversity, and thirdly, PE router diversity. The fourth diversity area is the enterprise local site entrance diversity. The purpose of these diversity options is to provide a failover at a location so that if one connection fails, that connection will fail over to the second connection or the tertiary connection, and that alternative connection will keep the location up and running. So let me get in a little more detail. Firstly, on local access diversity, it provides the diversity in the last mile or local loop. That is, meaning from the enterprise's site or facility to and from the service's point of presence. The service examples could be a dedicated internet POP or the MPLS POP. POP diversity is a pretty straightforward concept with the dual redundant connections provisioned into separate physical POPs. As a best practice, though, be very clear with the carrier to say that a POP is defined as a separate physical address for the two facilities, POP 1 and POP 2. As an example of a gotcha, sometimes the carrier will say that it defines POP diversity as two different floors in a single multi-story building. They will say that is defined by them as POP diversity, but it's not because, if you have a fire and that's happened in New York City in the past or a long-term power outage, you want that second POP to be in a different physical address to make sure you don't have a single point of failure. Secondly, P, router diversity. That provides diversity within the POP. So let's say an organization, an enterprise, does not want to have POP diversity, but they should request PE router diversity. And that prevents, to have that kind of diversity, is a single point of failure within the POP. In other words, two PE routers or the PE router or the card within the PE router fail, so that you're having two dual redundant connections into a single POP, and the enterprise wants to prevent having all those connections in a single card or in a single rack in the PE router. There have been enterprises that have many connections in a metro area, and that all the connections will be provisioned by a carrier, potentially in a single P router and in a few cards. So that often single card and many connections, there's a failure, possibility of it. And if the card fails and does not fail over to the redundant card in the shelf, and then all sites within that metropolitan area will have an outage simultaneously. So this P router diversity issue is very preventable if you ask your carrier to provision P router diversity. Okay, finally, let's discuss building entrance diversity. Building entrance diversity is defined as having two separate entryways into the enterprise's facility with separate access circuits flowing through each entrance. If something were to go wrong with one entrance, the other entrance would continue to operate normally in terms of your property. However, this type of diversity is typically the responsibility for implementing by the enterprise, because this is private property, or the landlord if you're leasing. For the latter, the enterprise needs to request and obtain this ability to have dual entrances, and ideally the enterprise will include the network team when considering purchasing or leasing facilities with dual entrances where uptime is critical.
All right, thanks for that, David. Okay, Brent, can you delve into best practices for buying diversity? I mean, how does an enterprise obtain diversity for its sites? Is this something where you just call your carrier and you ask for it?
Thanks, Joe. I have two simple points regarding best practices. First, do a competitive RFP, because if you don't ask, you're never going to get what you need. And second, don't listen to what your long-term incumbent provider is telling you is possible, because I can guarantee you more is possible. This may be a little simplistic, but through many client engagements, we've seen this story play itself out time and time again. Let me give you two recent examples of where both of these principles played out. TC2 recently worked with a client that needed diversity at all sites, but had been told by its incumbent provider that diversity wasn't possible for almost 300 of its 1,000 plus sites. And this was after paying millions of dollars in special construction charges over the years. We engaged in a sole source negotiation with the incumbent and received the same response that the client had received for years, that the only way to get more sites with diversity would require millions of dollars of special construction. After hearing this same old response, the client took TC2's advice that it was time to try a new tactic and invite other suppliers to participate in a competitive procurement for their WAN business. So, Joe, want to guess what happened once we went to RFP?
Well, I'm sure based on TC2's experience with the RFP process that the results were much different than what you saw with a sole source negotiation. So, okay, go ahead. Tell us what happened.
All right, so the results were shocking for our client. The incumbent found religion, and over 200 of those sites that couldn't get diversity before magically could get diversity without any extra charges. And over 70 of the remaining sites could get it, but with the same old multi-million-dollar special construction charges. However, the best result is that two of the other carriers that were participating found a way to deliver full diversity without special construction cost. And even better, one of these carriers could deliver with a cost savings of greater than 40% of what the incumbent had proposed. How did the other carriers make this happen? First, they had the motivation and creativity to work with a broader array of underlying access providers, where the incumbent had the old Arbach monopoly mindset of wanting the client to pay for their network. Second, the other carriers simply had invested more in their enterprise network than the incumbent, and therefore had more options to provide the diversity that the incumbent needed. As a side note, it's always a good idea to see where your incumbent provider is investing their strategic dollars. Do they want to be a robust enterprise network provider, or do they want to be an entertainment or media provider? Another quick anecdotal customer experience. TC2 had a client with a global footprint and hard-to-reach locations. In this case, an aggregator provided 100% diversity by using their extensive underlying global network of access providers, but also by bringing a creative solution like using radio frequency point-to-point connections for the local access portion of the connection to deliver the diversity. It was a great solution for a client that had spent decades being told, no, it's not possible by their incumbent provider. And one last note. It's not too far in the distant future that we will see even more alternative solutions coming into play, like Amazon Starlink or the equivalent low Earth orbit providers.
That's very cool stuff. So, David, what about work from home and providing more resiliency in that context?
Joe, work from home now is really the new normal for many enterprises since COVID-19 has become COVID-21, and therefore also enterprises need to be creative, and they've had to adapt to this new and ever-changing environment. And the work from home phenomenon does provide some benefits like real estate cost savings and the ability to recruit talent outside of an expensive and hard to reach commuter metro area like New York City. So I think, as many business leaders say, that their pre-COVID real estate plans have actually changed, and there's going to be more work from home even after the pandemic is removed from the world. So typically individual workers are responsible for their work from home internet access. That's most of our clients' scenario. But it's important for these work from home end users to have a backup connection like 4G, LTE, or 5G, because essentially they're going to need to have the similar resiliency. From a security perspective, remote access points or RAPs can serve as a valuable security measure for work from home employees. Examples such as an Aruba RAP or having a virtualized SD-WAN instance on employees' PC. So those are a couple of security measures in addition to harden that remote worker's location.
Okay, thank you, David, and thank you as well, Brent. David, we're going to have to see if that COVID-21 sticks. I know that we have so much more, but sadly, we are out of time. Now, if you as a company are taking a closer look at your company's WAN and your cloud-first strategies, and you would like to discuss it with David, Brent, me, or any of our LB3 and TC2 colleagues, please just send us an email or give us a call. You can also stay current by subscribing to these Staying Connected podcasts, by checking out our websites, and by following us on LinkedIn.